If you weren't paying attention, last week was a massive milestone in Baldur's Gate 3 news. Larian released 2 trailers to hype the game and announce the official release date. It's going to be August 2023. It cannot come soon enough. I'm so excited. Anyways, one of the things that the trailers Larian release showed us was they're leaning on Minsk very hard for their marketing. Minsk absolutely will be in Baldur's Gate 3, and probably he'll be one of our companions, just like Astarion or Shadowheart. And this is something that Larian really hopes will sell copies of their game. I understand this completely. Minsk is an iconic character in this franchise. I personally love him. In fact, I had made a build months ago to translate Minsk into the Baldur's Gate 3 system. And so for this video, I want to discuss who Minsk is, for those of you who don't know, how he played in the original games and what made him so iconic, and then show you my, I think, very clever build for playing him in Baldur's Gate 3. So let's get into it. So, who is Minsk? Well, this is Minsk right here.
Point, I punch.
Minsk was a character in the original Baldur's Gate series, and back then there really wasn't a lot to characters. There was all the standard D&D stuff like race, class, alignment, their stats, and then after that, all that the game creators really did was write a short backstory, which you could find in their biography, just a few paragraphs long usually. There was, for some, I'd say for most companions, a short quest that you could do. And in some of these quests, they would have lines, but the lines were very short. And then there's their portrait and their voice acting. That's it. It wasn't really seen as a selling point in the games back then. Part of the fun of the game, that you would really get to know and interact with these characters and maybe change them. They were really just sidekicks. And the best ones, the ones I really remembered as a kid, were ones with little, usually humorous gimmicks, a funny moment, a funny way of speaking, just something funny about them that would stand out to you. And that was the peak of companion design. And frankly, I kind of miss it, although the things that we do with companions these days are also really cool. Minsk was a human, neutral good ranger. If you read his biography, it explains that he is a Rashemi berserker who's on a quest. And part of his quest is to bodyguard the witch Danaher.
They wish my ear.
This is Danaher. But the really big part of Minsk's character, and this was kind of, again, just a glimpse into an older way of making characters, was his statistics. These days, when we make a character, we really make them. We author our characters. But back then, at least the way I played, and the perception I had of the way other people played, was that characters were discovered as much as they were authored, let's say. Where you really didn't make a character from scratch, there were certain fixed points of randomness. So the process of making a character kind of was like an augury ritual. You rolled some dice to generate their stats, and then you interpreted those dice into a character. You kind of read the tea leaves, so to speak. And that was the really fun part. I still, frankly, prefer making characters this way than with point pie. There are balanced issues, but it's just so fun. And I could really see the process of interpretation going on with Minsk, even when I was a kid and I first encountered him. Because if we look at his stats here, he has an 1893 strength. This is a relic of an older edition of D&D where warrior classes like rangers or fighters would get bonuses to their strength, and that's what's represented by the secondary number. Basically, what this means is that he is close to the peak that a human can be as far as strength is. I mean, he is almost supernaturally strong. And then he also has a 15 dexterity, a 15 constitution. But then when we get to his mental stats, he has 8 intelligence, 6 wisdom, and 9 charisma. That isn't good. Right? So here's a character that is very physically gifted, but mentally speaking, they're a moron. And the way that the writers for Baldur's Gate 1 interpreted this is that Minsk has suffered a head wound in his past, and that's what leaves him with these very deficient mental stats. So what he is for your for your party is kind of like a Forrest Gump character. He has a kind of strange wisdom to him. He always seems to do the right thing and wants to do the right thing, but, you know, literally speaking, he's just a bit slow. He's a little bit slower than everyone else, and one of the funny ways that manifested in the game is with this. This is Boo. Boo is a hamster, Minsk's hamster, which takes up a quick item slot. You cannot remove him. Trying to just makes that squeaky sound. Minsk is convinced that Boo, his hamster, is in fact a giant space hamster, and this was a thing in D&D back then. Giant space hamsters were a cosmic force. But of course Boo is small. How could he be a giant hamster when he's just normal hamster sized? Well, Minsk answered that he is a miniature giant space hamster, with all of the wisdom of the cosmos packed into his tiny hamster brain. And Minsk would talk to Boo. Minsk relied on Boo as kind of like a Jiminy Cricket. Boo was his leader, his conscience, and his companion. Now, that is the writing of the character, Minsk, but how did he function mechanically? Well, as you can see, with his stats, he makes a pretty good warrior, and if he was a base class fighter, he'd be much better. The only unfortunate thing is they made Minsk a ranger, which in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, rangers are kind of they're weaker than fighters. They're one of the weaker classes in the game. They're slightly weaker than fighters, but with an even slower experience progression. But nevertheless, I played with him often, and the way I always built him in Baldur's Gate 1 is as a two-handed sword-wielding warrior in a 1-up, 5-back party composition. So to me, he just seemed tailor-made for this sword, the Spider's Bane. Spider's Bane's a +2 greatsword, which was really good. And while you were wielding it, it made you immune to effects like hold and web. I would sit down here back and my other wizards in my party and spam web spells while Minsk ran in and chopped everyone to death with Spider's Bane. And then the remaining warriors of my party were always archers. Archers were so good in Baldur's Gate 1. So, like I was saying, I do a 1-up, 5-back composition. 5 casters and archers firing into the web spell. And one single Minsk tanking anyone who passed their saving throw and chopping to bits everyone who failed, while being completely immune to the web spell through Spider's Bane. This is still, I think, a good strategy for Baldur's Gate 1, and it was the classic way to build Minsk. But by Baldur's Gate 2, I started equipping Minsk differently, and I just kind of assumed everyone else did as well, because with Baldur's Gate 2, you got the introduction of the 2-weapon fighting style. In the original Baldur's Gate 1, you could not dual-wield weapons. That wasn't introduced to Baldur's Gate 2. And once it was introduced, Rangers kind of got to do it for free, and Minsk is a ranger. I wanted to use this cool new thing on him. So I typically equipped Minsk with the iconic Flail of Ages. This is one of the best weapons in Baldur's Gate 2. Hands down, extremely, extremely good weapon. And you get it very early in a quest you want to do anyways. So Minsk up the Flail of Ages, and in the offhand, I would equip him with the Defender of Easthaven. This is a classic double dual-wielding flail combo. The Defender of Easthaven is a really good offhand stat stick kind of weapon. You want your offhand weapon to be a stat stick anyways, and this one gave you +1 to your armor class, which is negligible late in Baldur's Gate 2, but the big one is the +20% resistance to physical damage. Minsk had ways of stacking even more physical damage resistance through the armor face spell and other things. Yes, that's how I played Minsk, the dual-wielding flail combo in Baldur's Gate 2. So in summary, to me, the core parts of Minsk's character is first that he's a human ranger. He believes even small creatures can be giants, fights in combo with a wizard, and can either dual wield or use a two-handed weapon. So here's how I translate that Minsk concept into Baldur's Gate 3. Of course, we do have some very obvious decisions. Minsk is a ranger, he has to be a ranger, human ranger, and I give him the folk hero background because he's literally the hero of the Sword Coast. As far as attributes go, here's the spread I went for. The only really controversial choice here is the 13 wisdom, Whereas in the original Baldur's Gate game, he has a 6 wisdom. But he's older now, and wisdom is kind of necessary for rangers, so I don't mind bumping up his wisdom as long as he has the lowest possible intelligence and the highest possible strength that a human can get at level 1. That's what really matters to me. And then the only other really big choice that you make in character creation is, Ranger Knight. I think Ranger Knight fits him best. The history skill proficiency makes sense when he's literally lived through so much history, right? It's not that he studied it, he was just there. And this is the important one. Take the Beast Tamer option. The Natural Explorer ones are tempting, but we are going for Beast Tamer here. It's essential to the build for reasons which I'll explain, once we've kind of gone through the levels. For level 2, here I am, level 2, I take the 2-weapon fighting. We're going to be dual-wielding flails, or kind of like flails, later, so definitely the 2-weapon fighting feature. And then spells don't really matter that much. You could take Hunter's Mark. Speak with Animals is funny and kind of thematic for him, so sure, let's do that. Then for level 3, we are going to take the Hunter subclass, and we are going to take the Giant Killer Prey. This is very seldom used, but it's a key part of this build. What's going to be cool about the Giant Killer is an interaction with a spell that I will show you later on. But for now, level 3, just take it, Giant Killer. And then we're going to skip ahead to level 4 now. Then at level 4, the big decision we make is our feat. There's lots of options here, but I really want to take the dual wielder feat because I want to be able to dual wield flails, which are not finesse weapons. Alright, now I've made some pretty unorthodox choices, very suboptimal choices when leveling up Minsk here, so I want to show you why I did all of these things. Primarily, the build functions around a triangle of interlocking synergies between the Giant Killer feature, the Enlarged Person spell, and the Find Familiar spell. So we're actually going to start by summoning our familiar. And of course, who could our familiar be except for our hamster, Boo? It's not a hamster, it's technically a rat, but we can just use our imagination and say it's a hamster. Alright, let's show this build in action by starting a fight here. Our fight begins. Nice, and we actually have Boo starting. Alright, so our combat is against an ogre, that's a large creature, and a hobgoblin, that's a medium. It's pretty important the size of the creature we fight for the Giant Killer feature. So for now, I'm just going to hide Boo there. Now watch this. What you saw there is this ogre attacked Minsk, and then he retaliated. That is his Giant Killer feature. With Giant Killer, whenever a creature that is large or bigger attacks you, you can use your reaction to make an attack against them. Now, longtime viewers of my channel or readers of the articles on my website know how powerful it is to use your reaction to make an attack. It really boosts your DPR a lot, especially at the low levels that we're playing in the early access. You can think of optimizing in 5th edition and Baldur's Gate 3 as finding efficient uses of your 4 major action slots. That's your standard action, your bonus action, your reaction, and your concentration. An effective build will use all 4 of these consistently and efficiently. Now, one of the hardest action slots to optimize is reaction by far. It's really hard to use it consistently and efficiently. But Giant Killer is a very efficient use that doesn't cost any resource at all. However, it's very situational in its use. You have to be attacked by a large or bigger creature, and most of the enemies you fight are around medium size. But we are going to work our way around that with the second part of our interlocking synergy. That's the Enlarge Reduce spell. So this spell allows you to enlarge a target or reduce a target. Typically you enlarge an ally to buff them or reduce an enemy to debuff them. But we are actually going to use it to enlarge this hobgoblin. Alright, he failed his saving throw. He gets to make a Constitution saving throw to resist. In this case, he failed. And now he is also a large creature. And you can see... Now, interesting part of this build, since Minsk is dual wielding, Larian actually allows him to attack with both of his weapons on that retaliation reaction. That's very, very strong. He's basically getting 2 bonus attacks now on a reaction. That is extremely efficient. All that's left to explain is the third part of our interlocking synergy, which is the Find Familiar spell, which we use to summon our miniature giant space hamster, Boo. Now, remember, when I cast Enlarge Person on this hobgoblin, he made a Constitution saving throw. Saving throws are always unreliable, unless you can find a way to debuff them. Now let me ask you, what is the strongest Constitution saving throw debuff in Baldur's Gate 3? Now you're probably thinking it's a tie between all of the features of the game which impose disadvantage on Constitution saving throws. If you're thinking that, you're wrong. You're so wrong, it's funny. Because the best way to debuff Constitution saving throws in Baldur's Gate 3 is Boo. See, Boo gets this ability, Infectious Bite. It's a standard attack, and if it hits, it does 1 damage, but it also applies the Infected status condition. This status condition applies disadvantage on Constitution saving throws, but it also reduces enemy Constitution by 1. Okay, so if we examine this hobgoblin here, so if we imagine that this hobgoblin had a 12 Constitution, a 12 Constitution would give it a +1 to its Constitution saving throws. Boo lands the Infect attack on him. It would reduce his Constitution from 12 to 11, which actually reduces that modifier by 1. So now he doesn't get any bonuses to his Constitution saving throw. And on top of that, he also has disadvantage on the saving throw. So it doesn't work on everyone, but targets that have that even number Constitution stat, Infectious Bite becomes the best debuff to Constitution saving throws. So this is the build. You have Boo biting targets to infect them. Then you can use your wizard. In this case, it's Gale. If it was the original game, of course, it would have been the wizard, Danaher. She will cast Enlarge Person to make those medium-sized targets into large. And then, of course, here's the best part about it. This was just a miniature giant hobgoblin. And to Minsk, even the tiniest hobgoblins could be secret giants. And he's ready to slay them. That's pretty much it for the build, but I do want to give a quick note about what equipment to use. I forgot to include it in the clip, so I'm just going to say it really quickly. There are 2 key items for this build, and that is the Helm of Grit in combination with the Shattered Flail used in your offhand. The big reason we want the Shattered Flail is, well, one of the big reasons is it's the closest thing to a flail that we can get in Baldur's Gate 3. I like to imagine in my run that it is the Flail of Ages shattered again, waiting to be reforged again. But there's also mechanical reasons why it's really good, and that is that the Shattered Flail is one of the best on-hit weapons in the game. What I mean by that is it gives you a lot for each hit, and the more hits you can get with it, the more you're multiplying those bonuses. I mean, it's a +2 mace, so that's already +2 damage on hit, and then it heals you 1d6 on each hit. In Baldur's Gate 3, paradoxically, you can get the most hits with your offhand weapon, which is why we're wielding in the offhand. The reason you get the most is because you get extra bonus action attacks with the Helm of Grit when you drop below 50% health, which is going to be happening often for Minsk because, as we saw, this build requires him to be tanking hits from large creatures. His armor classes are going to be that high, so he'll be taking damage and he'll be dropping below 50%, and that will give you that extra bonus action attack, which will then be healing you back. And he'll also get an attack with his offhand on those retaliation attacks. So one of the effects of this build is that it gets a lot of offhand attacks. And with the Shattered Flail in that offhand, you're getting the most on-hit bonuses on those attacks. There are some other equipment things and ways to run this that I haven't talked about in the video, but you can find them all in the written article I made for this on my website, which I will link below. That's it for the build. Just to end with some news, patch 9 is going to be dropping on December 14th, probably a few days away from when most of you will be watching this video. We are expecting the Paladin class to get released in the patch, and I'm hoping some other new goodies that I can review. So stay tuned. I will have the Paladin class review out as quickly as I can in this very busy time of the year. But otherwise, guys, thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.